So today we're going to dive into a pretty dramatic story from the 18th century. It all comes from a personal letter, but it's about faith, a huge public backlash, and this incredible fight for the simple freedom to think for yourself. And it feels surprisingly close to home, even now. Just imagine getting a letter from a friend, and this is what you read. A death threat, basically, telling you that you'd be better off at the guillotine than continuing down your path of questioning things. I mean, this is the level of hostility we are talking about here. This wasn't some political squabble, it was all about belief, and the stakes were literally life and death. And the whole story comes to us from this one document, a letter written way back in 1795 by a Baptist minister named Edward Sharman. And get this, he wasn't writing to some king or a government official. He was writing it to his former congregation, the very people who had just completely turned on him. This letter was his only defense.
So, how in the world does a respected minister end up on the receiving end of guillotine threats from his own people? Well, it didn't start with some grand rebellious act. It all started with a simple, honest question that he, the minister, just couldn't answer. Yeah, the whole thing kicks off with this moment of, profound humility. Sharman, a guy who teaches others, gets challenged on a point of theology by a laboring man. And when he dug deep for an answer, he realized he didn't have a good one. He was just holding on to opinions he couldn't actually defend with reason. His entire foundation just started to crumble.
So he's staring down this really stark choice. Either keep preaching something he no longer believes is scripturally sound, or face whatever comes from being intellectually honest. For Sharman, clinging to a belief he couldn't defend felt like being a hypocrite. And that was something he just couldn't do. In Sharman, he chose honesty. And for that, he got hit with what he called a dreadful storm. His quiet, private journey of questioning quickly turned into a very public, very painful ordeal. The attacks began almost immediately. And the first line of attack wasn't theological. Not at all. It was personal. They didn't even bother engaging with his arguments. They just went after his mind. They called him intellectually weak, maybe even a little insane. It's a classic tactic, right? If you can't beat the idea, you try to discredit the person who has it. And from there, it just gets worse. When calling him crazy wasn't enough, they brought in the devil. His rational, careful questions were suddenly reframed as demonic influence. See, he wasn't just wrong anymore. He was evil, working with Satan himself, and of course, headed straight for hell. So you see the playbook here, right? It was this multi-pronged attack. He wasn't just a heretic. He was weak-minded, crazy, arrogant, and devil-led. It was a full-on assault designed not to win an argument, but to completely destroy his character and shut him up for good. But here's the really amazing part. In the middle of this absolute storm of criticism, Sharman didn't just defend his new theological ideas. He actually discovered a much bigger, much more fundamental principle, a human right that was really at the heart of his entire struggle. Okay, so for a little context, the specific belief he started to question was the doctrine of the Trinity. After doing his own research, he ended up with a more Unitarian view, the idea that God is one single being. Now, to his community, this was total heresy. But what it really did was place him in this growing movement of rational dissent that was challenging old ideas all across Europe. But for Sharman, the issue became way bigger than the Trinity. It was about what he called the invaluable right of private judgment. And this is the core idea he ends up defending in his letter: the freedom for every single person to read, to interpret, and to think for themselves, instead of just being forced to accept other men's creeds. And this is where he exposes the massive hypocrisy of it all. See, his community as Protestant dissenters was basically founded on the principle of breaking away from the established church. They were all about freedom of conscience. But in practice, they turned around and enforced their own rigid beliefs with just as much intolerance, using excommunication as what Sharman called the sword of persecution. So he's been condemned by his friends, cast out of his own church, and not even given a chance to defend himself. What do you do? Well, Sharman had only one option left: to fight for his reputation and his principles. He decided to take his case public. He wasn't given a trial, not even a verbal appeal. His character was being dragged through the mud, and his ideas were being twisted. Publishing this letter was the only shot he had to set the record straight and make his case directly. And this part is so crucial. He didn't frame this as some act of revenge or anger. For Sharman, publishing his defense was a moral duty.
He saw it as an act of obedience to his own conscience, and as he saw it, to God. He truly felt he had no other choice. His closing line, wow, it says everything. He doesn't sign off as a rebel or an outcast. He signs off as E. Sharman and a servant in the cause of Christ. He's totally reclaiming his identity here, basically arguing that his rational questions and his search for truth are the highest form of faith, not a betrayal of it. So, at the end of the day, what should you take away from all this? Well, Sharman's letter leaves us with these powerful, timeless arguments. First, that true religion is more threatened by intolerance than by honest questions. Second, that demanding everyone think the exact same way is just plain unreasonable, because no two people are alike. And finally, that forcing people to follow man-made rules is not just an attack on our freedom, but an infringement on the rights of God.
Edward Sharman's story really forces us to ask a question that's just as vital today as it was in 1795. In our own communities, our workplaces, our societies, how do we balance our shared values with individual freedom? It really makes you think, where is that line between protecting a group's identity and crushing that invaluable right to disagree?